The devil has red skin, horns, and a pitchfork. The image of the devil that most people carry around in their heads, red skin, curved horns, pointy tail, pitchfork, has absolutely nothing to do with the Bible. Not a single verse describes Satan this way. What you're actually looking at is a mashup of pagan gods that got absorbed into medieval European Christian art over centuries. The horns and cloven hooves were borrowed almost directly from Pan, the Greek god of the wild. The pitchfork echoes the trident of Poseidon. Medieval mystery plays and later church-sponsored artwork leaned into these images to make evil look visually obvious and grotesque, which was useful for scaring illiterate congregations. The Bible itself, in 2 Corinthians 11:14, goes in the complete opposite direction, describing Satan as someone who disguises himself as an angel of light, radiant, beautiful, not a monster you'd recognize across a crowded room. The red devil is a costume Christianity borrowed from its neighbors and then forgot to return. The devil lives in hell and rules it. This one is so deeply embedded in popular culture that even many practicing Christians believe it without question. The idea that Satan sits on a throne in hell, ruling it like a kingdom, is not a biblical concept. Hell in Scripture is a place of punishment destined for Satan, not a domain he governs. More striking is where the Bible actually places him, roaming the earth. The book of Job, one of the oldest texts in the Hebrew Bible, opens with Satan appearing before God among the heavenly beings in Job 1:6, casually reporting that he has been roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. Ephesians 2:2 calls him the prince of the power of the air, which early theologians interpreted as the earthly atmosphere, not an underground kingdom. Revelation 20:10 eventually describes Satan being thrown into the lake of fire as a punishment. He doesn't rule hell. Hell is where he ends up. The devil's name is Lucifer. The name Lucifer appears exactly once in the entire Bible, Isaiah 14:12 in the King James Version. And even that single appearance is a translation choice, not a proper name. The original Hebrew word is Hallel ben Shachar, meaning son of the dawn or shining one. When Jerome translated the Hebrew scriptures into Latin in the 4th century, he rendered that phrase as Lucifer, which was simply the Latin word for the planet Venus, the morning star. The passage itself is almost certainly addressed to the king of Babylon, mocking his fall from power. The theologian Origen, writing in the 3rd century AD, was among the first to link this verse directly to Satan, and the identification stuck. Modern translations, including the NIV and ESV, have quietly dropped Lucifer entirely, replacing it with morning star. The name Lucifer as Satan's personal title is a product of translation decisions and centuries of theological assumption, not original scripture. The devil tempted Adam and Eve as a snake. Genesis 3 describes a serpent in the Garden of Eden, crafty, persuasive, and responsible for the whole catastrophe. What it does not do is identify that serpent as Satan. Nowhere in the text of Genesis is the serpent called the devil, described as a fallen angel, or connected to any cosmic adversary. The connection between Satan and the garden serpent comes from Revelation 12:9, written roughly 1,000 years after the Genesis account, which refers to that ancient serpent called the devil. Early Jewish readers of Genesis largely did not interpret the serpent as Satan at all. In rabbinic tradition, the serpent is generally treated as exactly what it appears to be, a cunning animal. The Satan as serpent identification became standard Christian doctrine by the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, but it is a theological interpretation layered onto the text, not something the text itself states. The devil is the opposite of God, his equal and enemy. The image of God and Satan locked in an eternal, evenly matched cosmic war is not Christian theology. It is Zoroastrianism, The ancient Persian religion built its entire framework around two co-equal divine forces, Ahura Mazda representing good and Angra Mainyu representing evil, locked in permanent opposition. Christianity absorbed some of this dualistic flavor through cultural contact during the Babylonian exile and the Second Temple period, but the Bible never endorses it. The Christian Satan is a created being. He is not God's rival. He is God's creature, and a finite one. The clearest illustration of this is again in Job, where Satan cannot so much as touch Job without explicit divine permission in Job 1:12. God sets the limits. Satan operates within them. Calling them equals is like calling a prisoner and the warden equals, because they're both in the same building. The devil fell. Because he wanted to be evil, people tend to imagine Satan as something that simply decided to be evil, a villain who woke up one morning and chose darkness for its own sake. The biblical picture, pieced together from Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, is considerably more tragic and interesting than that. Ezekiel 28:17 describes a being corrupted not by a desire for wickedness, but by pride in its own beauty and status. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty. Isaiah 14:13 describes the internal monologue of the fall as pure ambition. I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. Satan, according to these texts, fell because he wanted to be more than he was, not because he wanted to be evil. He was originally good. The corruption came after. That distinction matters because it makes the devil a warning about pride rather than simply a cartoon embodiment of irredeemable nastiness. The devil can read your mind and know your thoughts. A lot of people move through their spiritual lives genuinely afraid that Satan has access to their innermost thoughts, that he can monitor their doubts, their fears, their temptations in real time. Scripture does not support this. Omniscience in the Bible belongs exclusively to God. Psalm 139 verse 2 describes God as knowing when you sit and when you rise and perceiving your thoughts from afar. 1 Kings 8:39 states that only God knows every human heart. Satan, as a created being, powerful, yes, but finite, is never attributed anything close to this capacity in any biblical text. The reason temptation feels so personal and intimate is not because the devil is reading your mind. Theologians generally attribute Satan's apparent effectiveness to a sophisticated understanding of human nature broadly, not supernatural access to individual thoughts. The fear of a mind-reading devil is understandable, but scripturally unsupported. The devil can possess anyone he wants. The horror genre has done enormous damage to the popular understanding of demonic possession. In film and television, possession is essentially random. The devil swoops in, takes whoever he wants, and the helpless victim is powerless to stop it. Biblical and mainstream theological frameworks look nothing like this. In Job 1:10, God describes having placed a hedge around Job specifically to protect him, and Satan cannot breach it without permission. In Luke 22:31, Satan has to explicitly ask for permission to sift the Apostle Peter. God retains the authority to allow or deny it. 1 Peter 5:8 warns believers to resist the devil, strongly implying that resistance is genuinely possible. Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox traditions broadly agree that Satan's power over individuals operates within limits set by God. The idea of totally unchecked demonic possession flattens a complex theological framework into something that works better as a movie premise than a doctrinal position. The devil is responsible for all evil and suffering. Blaming Satan for all the bad things in the world is convenient, but it is not especially biblical. The Old Testament is surprisingly direct about this. Isaiah 45:7 has God stating plainly, I form light and create darkness. I bring prosperity and create disaster. I, the Lord, do all these things. Amos 3:6 asks rhetorically whether disaster can come upon a city without God having caused it. Job's suffering is not a rogue operation by Satan. It is explicitly sanctioned by God before it begins. Natural disasters in the Hebrew Bible are frequently attributed to divine action, not demonic interference. The instinct to hand Satan the blame for all suffering also quietly removes human accountability from the equation. War, cruelty, and systemic injustice are things humans choose, not curses delivered from below. The Satan as cause of everything bad reading oversimplifies a tradition that is far more honest about complexity. The devil was cast out of heaven before creation. The timeline most people assume: Satan falls from heaven before God creates the world and then shows up in the garden already corrupted, is not clearly established anywhere in Scripture. It is a narrative convenience that later theology constructed by stitching several unrelated texts together. Job, which many scholars consider among the Bible's oldest books, shows Satan with continued access to the divine counsel long after creation, speaking to God directly in Job 1:6, without anyone treating this as unusual. In Luke 10:18, Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven," during his own earthly ministry, which some scholars interpret as future or metaphorical rather than a reference to a pre-creation event. Revelation 12 describes a war in heaven, but its timing is hotly debated among preterist, amillennial, and futurist interpreters. The clean pre-creation fall is a theological story. The Bible's actual timeline is far murkier. The devil is ugly, and you'll know him when you see him. This might be the most practically dangerous misconception on the entire list. If you believe the devil looks like a monster, you will spend your life watching for something that announces itself through grotesque appearance, and miss entirely what Scripture says he actually does. 2 Corinthians 11:14 is one of the most explicit verses in the New Testament on this subject. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. The following verse extends this to his agents, described as servants of righteousness. The entire operational model described in biblical texts is one of deception through attractiveness, not horror. The monster imagery that does appear in Revelation, the beast, the dragon, is apocalyptic and symbolic literature, widely understood as such even by conservative scholars. The medieval instinct to make evil look hideous was visually effective but theologically backwards. You won't recognize the devil because he looks wrong. According to Scripture, that's precisely the point. The devil will eventually win some souls away from God permanently. The framing of the spiritual life as an ongoing, genuinely uncertain war, one Satan might actually win, produces a specific kind of anxiety that is common in certain Christian communities, but is hard to reconcile with how the Bible actually ends the story. Mainstream Christian eschatology across Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox traditions is not a cliffhanger. Revelation 20:10 describes Satan being thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where he will be tormented forever, a definitive end. Colossians 2:15 describes Christ at the crucifixion as having already disarmed the powers and authorities, present tense, accomplished fact. Hebrews 2:14 states that Christ took on human nature specifically to destroy him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil. The biblical picture is not a live contest. Theologians sometimes compare it to a war where the decisive battle has already been won, but scattered fighting continues. Satan's current activity in this framework is the thrashing of something already defeated. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.